No one in that church would ever forget the moment Emma's world shattered when the man who promised her forever suddenly turned his back at the altar. But what the viewers of Fate's Gentle Hands don't know yet is that her heartbreak was only the beginning of a far more dangerous storm. Because just as the whispers were rising, just as confusion tightened around the room, a figure stepped out from the last row, silent, commanding, carrying danger like a shadow that never left him. Alexander Volkov, the Mafia boss whispered about in every corner of the city, the man whose mere gaze could silence an entire room. And when he spoke, "Then she's mine," Emma's fate didn't just change. It detonated. Part 2 begins at that exact moment. The moment Alexander extended his hand, and Emma, trembling, had nowhere left to run. From here on, love, danger, betrayal, and buried truths will no longer stay hidden. You waited for this moment. Now the door of fate swings open. And the real story finally begins. The bullet that ended our peace didn't make a sound. Not at first. I stood beneath the crystal chandelier of the Metropolitan Opera House, a flute of champagne cold against my fingers. Alexander stood beside me, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, the heat of his palm burning through my emerald silk gown. He was listening to the mayor, but his eyes were scanning the room the predator never fully slept. Crack! The champagne flute in my hand exploded. Shards of crystal sprayed like diamond dust, and wine splashed across my chest. Down! The command came from the animal living inside my husband. Before I could blink, Alexander slammed me to the marble floor, covering my body with his own. Screams erupted. The polite murmur of high society shattered into chaotic terror as plaster rained down from the ceiling. "Stay down," Alexander growled, drawing a sleek black pistol from his tuxedo. "Dmitri, secure the exits." "Alex?" I gasped, the smell of gun oil filling my senses. "We move on my signal. Do not let go of my hand." He hauled me to my feet, his face a mask of cold calculation. We didn't run. We moved tactically. Alexander fired twice toward the balcony, 2 deafening cracks that dropped a shooter before dragging me through the kitchen doors. We sprinted past terrified chefs, bursting into the rainy alleyway where our black SUV idled. But the driver wasn't our usual man. It was Greg. I froze. My ex-fiancé, the man who had sold me to Alexander, was behind the wheel, pale and shaking. "Get in!" Greg screamed. "They're right behind you." Alexander shoved me into the back seat and dove in after me. "Drive." Greg stomped on the gas. The armored car squealed, fishtailing on the wet pavement. "I didn't do it for you," Greg shouted over the engine's roar. "Ivanov. He said he was going to take Lily. I couldn't let him take the kid." "Ivanov?" I repeated, the name chilling me more than the rain. "The butcher of Street Petersburg," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. He looked at the back of Greg's head with pure contempt. And apparently my wife's ex-fiancé decided to grow a spine at the last second. Headlights flooded the rear window. A black van smashed into our bumper. "Hold on," Alexander said calmly. He pressed a button on the armrest, revealing a hidden compartment with a submachine gun. "Alex?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I promised I wouldn't make you cry, Emma," he said, checking the magazine. "I didn't promise I wouldn't make them bleed." He rolled down the window. The wind roared in, followed by the deafening rattle of automatic fire. I curled into a ball, covering my ears, my ruined dress clinging to my skin. The pursuing van swerved and flipped, exploding in a ball of fire. "Go to the safe house," Alexander ordered Greg, pulling himself back inside. "Not the estate. They'll be watching the gates." "Safe house?" I asked. "What about Lily?" "The estate is a fortress," Alexander said, but his eyes were haunted. "We go underground until I find out who betrayed us." I looked at the blood on my thumb where the glass had cut me. The honeymoon was over. The war had begun. Oh my gosh, can you guys believe it? Greg, the ex who left her at the altar, is actually the getaway driver. Talk about a plot twist. If your heart is racing just like mine, hit that like button right now to show some support for Emma and Alexander. I'm curious to know where in the US our wolves are watching from. Are you watching from California, Texas, Florida, or maybe New York? Let me know your state in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the upcoming content is taking us to a much darker place. You won't want to miss it. The safe house was a windowless bunker in the meatpacking district. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind us, sealing us in with the smell of damp concrete and old oil. "Give me your phone," Alexander commanded, extending his hand toward me. "Alex, I need to call Mrs. Reynolds. I need to hear Lily's voice," I pleaded, reaching into my clutch. Alexander snatched the phone and threw it onto the concrete floor. He crushed it under his heel. Crunch. "Ivanov has cyber warfare capabilities," he said, his voice void of emotion. "You turn that on, you lead a drone strike right to us. Do you want them to find me? We're cut off?" I backed away, horrified. "Sitting in the dark while a maniac hunts our daughter?" "We are not sitting." Alexander turned his attention to Greg, who was cowering by the car. He stalked toward Greg, grabbed him by the throat, and slammed him into a metal chair bolted to the floor. "Sit," Alexander roared. "How did you know about the hit? Ivanov is a ghost. He doesn't talk to low-level gamblers." "I owed money," Greg sobbed. "A woman came to me, tall, blonde, scar on her neck. She said the debt was transferred to the Ivanov syndicate. She gave me a phone. She told me to track Emma." The air left the room. "You were stalking me?" I whispered. "They threatened my kidneys," Greg cried. "But tonight, she said the gala was the kill zone. She said taking out the wife would break the wolf." "I couldn't do it, Alex." Alexander drew his pistol. He didn't aim at Greg's head. He aimed at his knee. "Alex, no." I threw myself between them, placing my hands on Alexander's chest. "He saved us tonight. If you kill the only link we have to Ivanov, we lose." Alexander froze. He looked at me, the fury in his eyes slowly cooling into calculation. "You want to play games with the butcher?" "I want to win," I said firmly. Alexander lowered the gun. "Fine." He walked to the monitors. "Dmitri, status?" "Perimeter secure at the estate, boss." Dmitri's voice crackled over the comms. "No breach." I let out a breath. Lily was safe. Alexander sat on a crate, cleaning his weapon. "Ivanov blames my family for his exile 10 years ago. He wants to take everything I love. That is why we are here." I watched Greg shivering in the chair. Something he said gnawed at me. A woman, blonde, scar on her neck. My mind raced. The coffee shop, the library, the new piano teacher Alexander had hired last week. Miss Vanya. She always wore high-necked sweaters. "Alex," I whispered, the blood draining from my face. "The piano teacher, Miss Vanya." He looked up. "What about her? Did you vet her yourself?" "Dmitri did. Her references were perfect." "Greg said the woman had a scar on her neck," I said, my voice rising. "Vanya always wears turtlenecks, even when it's warm." Alexander stood up. The silence in the warehouse changed. It wasn't the silence of safety. It was the silence before an explosion. "Dmitri is with Lily," Alexander said, but his voice lacked certainty. "If she's already inside," I grabbed his arm. "She's the Trojan horse." Alexander grabbed a fresh magazine for his gun. The look in his eyes was terrifying. "Get up," he ordered Greg. "We are leaving." "Protocol says." "Protocol is dead," Alexander roared. "If that woman is near my daughter, I will tear the estate apart brick by brick." We ran back to the car. We were safe from the outside world, but the enemy was already inside the walls, and we were an hour away. Alexander drove the armored Mercedes like a weapon, hitting 110 miles per hour on the rain-slicked highway. "Who is he?" I demanded, clutching the dashboard. "Who is Nikolai Ivanov?" "He's a ghost," Alexander said through gritted teeth. "My father exiled him from Russia 10 years ago. He swore he would wait until I built a family, then take them piece by piece. I thought he was dead." We hit the exit ramp, tires screeching. The iron gates of the estate loomed ahead, dark and closed. The guard booth was empty. "System override," Alexander cursed. "She locked us out." "Ram it," I said. Alexander floored it. We hit the gates at 60 miles per hour. Metal screamed, the iron buckled, and we plowed through, skidding up the gravel drive. The house was a mausoleum, pitch black, silent. We bailed out. "Service entrance," Alexander whispered. He handed me a snub-nosed revolver. "Safety is off. Point and squeeze." I ran through the wet grass, my heart hammering. I slipped into the kitchen. Mrs. Reynolds was on the floor, unconscious, drugged. In the foyer, Dmitri and another guard were slumped against the wall. Alive, but out cold. Vanya had taken down a fortress without firing a shot. Plink. A single piano note echoed from the second floor. I looked at Alexander. He pointed upstairs. Go. He would make noise. I would be the shadow. I crept up the servants' stairwell in my stocking feet. The door to the music room was ajar. Moonlight spilled across the floor. Plink. You play it wrong, Malishka. A soft voice drifted out. It's F sharp. I peered inside. Lily was sitting at the piano in her purple pajamas, trembling. Standing behind her was Vanya, dressed in tactical black. She held a curved karambit knife pressed against the soft skin of Lily's throat. Papa Alex is home. Vanya smiled at the reflection in the piano lid. Let her go. Alexander stepped into the doorway, his hands raised. Drop the gun, Wolf, Vanya ordered. She pressed the blade deeper. A tiny bead of blood appeared on Lily's neck. Alexander dropped his weapon. He sank to his knees. The most powerful man I knew was surrendering. Beg, Vanya sneered. Nikolai wants you to beg. I stepped out from the shadows behind Vanya. I didn't scream. I raised the heavy revolver with both hands. Hey, I said. Vanya turned, her eyes widening. She hadn't expected the wife. I fired. The recoil jerked my arm back. The bullet took Vanya in the shoulder, spinning her around. She screamed, dropping the knife. Run, Lily, Alexander roared, launching himself at the assassin. Lily scrambled under the piano. Alexander tackled Vanya, slamming her into the floor. It was a blur of violence. He struck her with brutal, efficient blows until she lay still. Lily! Alexander scrambled up, scooping our daughter from under the piano. He buried his face in her hair. I slid down the wall, the gun slipping from my fingers. Alexander looked at me over Lily's head, his eyes wide with shock and awe. You missed the head, he rasped. I hit the shoulder, I whispered, shaking. I saved us. We have to go, Alexander said, pulling me up. This was just the first wave. We can't stay here. Where? I asked. He looked out the window at the storm. Russia. We go to the source. We kill the ghost in his own haunted house. Pack a bag, the Don commanded. We leave in 10 minutes. I looked at the blood on the floor. I picked up the gun. Okay, I said. Let's go hunt. The tension is off the charts. Alexander and Emma are racing through the storm, and the enemy is already inside the house with Lily. Do you think they'll make it in time? If you're praying for a miracle for them, drop a Save Lily in the comments and smash that like button. I see so many of you watching from all over the US. Whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, from Houston to Seattle, let me know what time you're watching this video. Make sure you are subscribed because the next chapter brings the most brutal confrontation yet. We're about to see if the wolf can protect his cub. The silence following the violence was heavier than the gunshot. In the music room, Vanya lay unconscious, zip-tied with industrial plastic cuffs Alexander had retrieved from a hidden panel in the hallway. I knelt beside Lily, checking her over for the 10th time. A small scratch on her neck, a thin red line where the knife had pressed, was the only physical mark. The psychological marks, I knew, would run much deeper. Is she a monster, Mommy? Lily whispered, clutching the fabric of my ruined dress. She looked like Miss Vanya, but she wasn't. No, baby. I smoothed her hair, my hands still shaking. She was a bad person wearing a mask, but Papa Alex stopped her. You stopped her, Lily corrected, looking at the gun I had placed on the piano bench. You made the loud noise. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scrub my skin until it was raw. But there was no time for breakdowns. Not in this world. Dmitri is awake. Alexander's voice came from the doorway. He had gone downstairs to administer a stimulant to his head of security. He's groggy, but combat effective. Mrs. Reynolds is stable. I've called a private medical team to take her to a secure clinic. She stays behind. And us? I stood up, hoisting Lily onto my hip. She was getting too big to carry, but I couldn't put her down. Not yet. The jet is fueled. We leave in 20 minutes. Alexander walked over to Vanya's prone form. He looked down at her with cold indifference. Dmitri, take the trash to the trunk. Dmitri appeared, stumbling slightly but looking murderous. He grabbed Vanya by the tactical vest and dragged her out of the room like a sack of cement. What about Greg? I asked. He's still in the car. Probably hyperventilating. Alexander adjusted his cufflinks. a bizarre habit of returning to elegance amidst chaos. He comes with us. To Russia? He is a witness, and if I leave him here, Ivanov will peel him apart to find out where we went. Besides, Alexander's eyes darkened. He might be useful bait. The drive to the private airfield was a blur of rain and neon lights. The city was asleep, unaware that a war had just broken out in its suburbs. Inside the SUV, the atmosphere was suffocating. Lily had fallen into a fitful sleep against my chest. Greg sat in the front seat, staring blankly at the windshield, muttering about how he should have just stayed in Vegas. In the cargo area behind the partition, Dmitri guarded Vanya. Alexander drove. He was on the phone constantly, speaking in rapid Russian, waking up contacts in time zones halfway across the world. "Prepare the safe house on Vasilevsky Island," he ordered. "No, not the penthouse. The old bunker. Yes, we are coming home." He hung up and glanced at me. "You're quiet." "I'm processing," I said, looking out the window at the passing runway lights. We had bypassed the main terminal and driven straight onto the tarmac where a sleek, black Gulfstream jet waited, its engines already whining. "You did what was necessary, Emma," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that always disarmed me. "You defended your young. There is no sin in that." "I shot a woman, Alex. I'm a nurse. I took an oath to do no harm." "And you honored it," he countered. "You prevented harm to Lily. That is the highest oath." The car stopped near the jet's stairs. The wind was howling, carrying the scent of jet fuel. "Let's move," Alexander commanded. We boarded quickly. Dmitri and the pilot hauled Vanya, who was beginning to stir, into the rear compartment of the plane. Greg followed, looking like a man marching to his execution. I carried Lily into the main cabin. It was luxurious, filled with cream, leather, and mahogany, a stark contrast to the blood and fear of the last few hours. I laid Lily down on a sofa, covering her with a cashmere blanket. She didn't wake up. As the plane taxied and roared into the sky, leaving America behind, I felt a strange detachment. The life I knew, the university, the coffee shops, the illusion of safety was gone. I was fleeing into the dark. "Drink." Alexander appeared beside me, handing me a glass of amber liquid. "Whiskey. Neat." I took it and downed it in one burn. It helped settle the tremors in my hands. "We have an 11-hour flight," Alexander said, sitting opposite me. "We need to talk about St. Petersburg." "Tell me," I said, the alcohol giving me a jagged edge of courage. "What are we walking into?" "Chaos," he admitted. "Ivanov has been consolidating power in my absence. He thinks I've gone soft in America. He thinks I'm just a businessman now." "And are you?" Alexander looked at his reflection in the dark window. "I was trying to be. For you. But to survive this, I have to become who I was before." "The wolf," I whispered. He nodded. "In Russia, I am not Mr. Volkov. I am Volk. You need to be prepared, Emma. The rules are different there. The police, the government. They are just another gang with better uniforms." "I can handle it," I said, though I wasn't sure I could. "What about Vanya? Why bring her?" "Because she knows Ivanov's current location, and she is going to tell us. She's a fanatic, Alex. She tried to slit a child's throat. She won't talk." Alexander stood up, unbuttoning his cuffs and rolling up his sleeves. The scars on his forearms seemed more prominent in the dim cabin light. "Everyone talks," he said simply. "It is just a matter of finding the right language." He moved toward the rear of the plane, where the prisoner was kept. "Alex," I called out. He stopped, looking back. "Don't." I hesitated. "Don't let Lily hear." "The cabin is soundproof," he promised. Then he disappeared behind the heavy curtain. 2 hours later, Alexander returned. He washed his hands in the small lavatory sink for a long time before sitting back down across from me. He looked weary. "She talked?" I asked. I didn't ask how. I didn't want to know. "She talked," he confirmed, drying his hands. "Ivanov is operating out of an old Soviet naval fort in Kronstadt. It's an island fortress near St. Petersburg." "A fortress," I repeated bitterly. "We just left one. This one is different. It's isolated, heavily guarded." But Vanya gave us something else. A date. A date! 3 days from now, the winter solstice ball. Ivanov is hosting it at the Catherine Palace. He's inviting the heads of the 5 families to declare himself the new kingpin of the region. He's coming out of the shadows, I realized. Arrogance, Alexander sneered. He thinks I am dead or hiding in New York. He wants to celebrate his victory. So we hit the fort? No, Alexander's eyes gleamed. The fort is a trap. We hit him at the ball. The Catherine Palace? My mind flashed to history books. That's a public landmark. Security will be insane. Exactly. He will feel safe there, surrounded by politicians and oligarchs. Alexander leaned forward, his voice intense. He wants to be seen? We will let him be seen. And then we will destroy him in front of the very audience he invited. But we can't just walk in, I argued. You're a target. I'm a target. We won't walk in as ourselves, Alexander said. We need a disguise, a cover. He looked at Greg, who had passed out in a chair across the aisle, snoring lightly. And we need a distraction. I saw the plan forming in his mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. And it was exactly the kind of thing that might work. I need to learn Russian, I said suddenly. Alexander blinked, surprised. What? If we are going to Russia, if we are infiltrating a ball, I can't be the mute American wife. I need to understand what they are saying about us. Alexander smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen all night. It was sharp and proud. 11 hours is not enough time to learn the language, he said, but it is enough to learn the essentials. He moved to sit beside me. Lesson 1. Ya nazertva. Ya nazertva, I repeated, the foreign syllables clumsy on my tongue. What does it mean? Alexander kissed my forehead. It means, I am not a victim. The plane banked, turning north toward the Arctic Circle, toward the cold, toward the past. I looked down at the sleeping form of my daughter, then at the man who was leading us into hell. Lesson 2, I said, taking his hand. Teach me how to say checkmate. The cold in Russia wasn't weather. It was a physical assault. When the Gulf Stream touched down on the private airstrip outside St. Petersburg, the wind whipped across the tarmac, carrying snowflakes that felt like shards of glass. It was midday, but the sky was a bruised purple gray, the sun a distant, failing bulb. Welcome to the motherland, Alexander said. He stood at the top of the jet stairs, inhaling the freezing air as if it were oxygen. He had changed during the flight. The ruined tuxedo was gone, replaced by a heavy wool coat with a fur collar, dark jeans, and heavy boots. He looked bigger here, harder. I stepped out behind him, clutching Lily's hand. I was wrapped in layers of cashmere and a thick parka Alexander had pulled from the plane's emergency supplies, but the chill went straight to my bones. It's like the inside of a freezer, Lily chattered, her breath puffing out in white clouds. Is Santa here? No, Malishka, Alexander said, picking her up effortlessly. But there are plenty of elves, dangerous ones. A convoy of 3 black SUVs waited on the tarmac. Men with Kalashnikovs stood by the doors. They didn't look like the polished security team in America. These men looked like they were carved from granite, scarred, bearded, and grim. As we approached, the lead man, a giant with a shaved head and a tattoo of a church spiderwebbing up his neck, stepped forward. He ignored me completely. He ignored Lily. He walked straight to Alexander and embraced him, slapping his back with enough force to crack ribs. Volk, the giant rumbled. You have returned from the dead. Sergei, Alexander replied in Russian, then switched to English for my benefit. The dead are hard to keep down. Sergei pulled back, his eyes finally sliding to me. There was no warmth in them, no curiosity, just the cold calculation of a man assessing a potential weakness. And this, Sergei gestured with a chin lift, is the American baggage? I stiffened. I'm his wife. Sergei laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. Wives are for peacetime. This is wartime. You should have left her in New York, Volk. She saved my life in New York, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. And she is the reason you are not currently scraping Vanya off the pavement. Show respect, Sergei, or I will find a new lieutenant. Sergei's eyes widened slightly. He looked at me again, reassessing. He gave a stiff, reluctant nod. My apologies, Mrs. Volkov. Let's move, Alexander commanded, cutting the tension. Is the safe house secure? The vault is ready, Sergei confirmed. But Ivanov knows you are in the airspace. We have maybe an hour before his wolves start sniffing. The drive into the city was a blur of bleak industrial landscapes and majestic, crumbling architecture. Street Petersburg was hauntingly beautiful, a city of ghosts and gold. We didn't go to a hotel. We drove to Vasilevsky Island, weaving through narrow streets until we reached an unassuming, gray stone building that looked like an abandoned warehouse. The car drove into a freight elevator. We descended. Down, down, down. "Where are we going?" Lily whispered, squeezing my hand. "To the Batcave," Alexander whispered back, winking at her. It was a flash of the father she knew, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The elevator opened into a sprawling underground complex. It was a bunker, converted into a living space. Concrete walls were hung with tapestries to dampen the sound. Persian rugs covered the cold floors. It was luxurious in a Spartan way, filled with weapons, monitors, and secure lines. "Nadia," Alexander called out. I blinked. Nadia, our housekeeper from America, stepped out of a side room. She must have flown ahead on a separate transport. "Mr. Volkov, Mrs. Volkov," she bowed her head. "I have prepared a room for Miss Lily. It is colorful." "Go with Nadia, baby," I told Lily, kissing her cold cheek. "I need to talk to Papa." Lily hesitated, looking at the grim men surrounding us, then nodded and ran to Nadia. Greg, who had been silent since the airport, was escorted by 2 guards to a holding cell in the back. "Sergei, bring up the schematics for the Catherine Palace," Alexander ordered, throwing his coat onto a leather sofa. He walked to a large table in the center of the room, dominated by a holographic map. "Alex," I said, approaching him, "we have 3 days. What is the plan?" Alexander looked at the map. "Ivanov is paranoid. The ball will have 3 layers of security. The outer perimeter, local police, bought and paid for. The inner perimeter, his private guard. And the core, the ballroom itself. So we can't bring weapons in," I surmised. "Not easily. Metal detectors, pat-downs." "Then how do we kill him?" Sergei snorted from the side of the room. "The American wants to know how to kill. Cute." I turned on him. The exhaustion, the fear, and the cold had stripped away my patience. The American put a bullet in a highly trained assassin while she was holding a knife to my daughter's throat. "So unless you have a better idea, Sergei, shut up and tell me the plan." The room went silent. The other guards stopped cleaning their weapons. Sergei stared at me. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his scarred face. "Volk, she has teeth." "I told you," Alexander murmured, a hint of pride in his voice. "Now, the plan." He pointed to the map. "We cannot shoot him. Too messy. Too many civilians. If we turn the Catherine Palace into a shooting gallery, the government will come down on us hard. We need to be surgical." He tapped a spot on the map marked VIP Lounge. "Ivanov has a weakness," Alexander said. "He is diabetic, severe type 1. I frowned. "How does that help us? He'll have his insulin tested." "Exactly," Alexander nodded. "He carries a personal insulin pump. It's a closed-loop system, wireless." My nursing training kicked in. "You want to hack his insulin pump?" "No," Alexander shook his head. "The encryption is too strong. I want to swap the cartridge." "Swap it with what?" Alexander looked at me. "Concentrated potassium chloride." I drew a sharp breath. "It causes cardiac arrest. It looks like a heart attack. No gunshot wound, no struggle." "A ghost death," Sergei agreed. "Clean." "But to swap the cartridge," I argued, looking at the layout. "Someone has to get close enough to touch him, without his guards noticing." "Someone he doesn't perceive as a threat," Alexander said, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "Someone who looks like a terrified trophy wife." The realization hit me. Me. "No," Sergei slammed his hand on the table. "Absolutely not. She is an amateur. Ivanov will smell the fear on her." "Ivanov will smell fear," Alexander agreed. "And that is exactly what will sell the act. If I send an assassin, he will know. If I send my wife trembling and submissive, bringing him a peace offering, he will let his guard down to gloat." "A peace offering?" I asked. "Me," Alexander said. "We will enter the ball. I will offer a truce. I will surrender my territory in exchange for safe passage back to America. While I am negotiating my surrender, while I am distracting him with my defeat, you will make the switch." "You want to surrender?" Sergei looked apoplectic. Volk, this is madness. You will look weak. I will look weak, Alexander corrected, so that we can be strong. He turned to me. Can you do it, Emma? Can you stand in front of the man who ordered the death of your daughter, play the role of the broken woman, and deliver the kill? I thought of the knife at Lily's throat. I thought of the blood on the music room floor. Teach me the sleight of hand, I said steadily, and tell me what dress to wear. The next 2 days were a blur of intense preparation. While Alexander and Sergei coordinated the logistics, securing fake invitations, bribing a waiter to spill a drink at the right moment, I spent hours with a man named Yuri, a former pickpocket turned illusionist. He taught me how to palm a small vial, how to bump into someone and apologize while my hands did work they shouldn't. Bump. Oh, I'm so sorry. Switch. Move away. I practiced until my fingers cramped. I practiced until I could do it blindfolded. But the hardest part wasn't the physical training, it was the mental transformation. Alexander was pulling away from me. In the bunker, he spoke mostly Russian. He slept for 2 hours a night, sitting in a chair by the door. He stopped touching me. He stopped calling me Emma. On the night before the ball, I found him in the armory, cleaning a pistol he wouldn't be able to take inside. Alex, I said. He didn't look up. Go to sleep. We move at 1,800 hours. Stop it, I said, walking over and taking the gun from his hands. I placed it on the table. What are you doing? He growled, his eyes flashing. I'm looking for my husband, I said. Because the man standing here? The Volk? I don't think I can trust him to catch me if I fall tomorrow. Alexander stood up, towering over me. The bunker lights cast deep shadows on his face. You wanted the truth, Emma? This is the truth. This is who I am here. Street. Petersburg demands a monster. If I am soft, even for a second, we die. I don't need you to be soft. I stepped closer, placing my hand on his chest, over his heart. It was beating slow and steady. I need you to be connected. To me. If we go in there as strangers, we fail. Ivanov will see the disconnect. Alexander looked down at my hand. His resolve cracked, just a fraction. He covered my hand with his own. I am terrified, he confessed, his voice a rough whisper. Not of dying, but of you seeing me do this. Of you watching me look a man in the eye and smile while you stop his heart. I am afraid that when we fly back to America, you will look at me and see only the killer. I already see the killer, Alex, I said softly. I saw him in the music room, and I loved him anyway because he saved our daughter. I reached up, touching the scar on his jaw. We do this together. We wash the blood off together. Okay? Alexander closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against mine. For a moment, the bunker, the cold, and the war faded. Okay, he breathed. Together. Suddenly, the red emergency lights in the bunker began to flash. A siren wailed a low, mournful sound. Sergei burst into the room. Volk, turn on the monitor. Channel 4. Alexander moved instantly, grabbing the remote. The wall of screens flickered to life. It was a live news broadcast. A reporter stood in front of a burning building in downtown St. Petersburg. Reports of a gas explosion at the warehouse district. That's one of our supply depots, Sergei cursed. But it wasn't the fire that mattered. The camera panned to a spray-painted message on the only wall left standing. It was in crude, red letters. Welcome home, little wolf. Bring the sheep. Alexander stared at the screen. His face hardened into stone. The moment of vulnerability was gone. The Volk had returned. He knows we are here, Alexander said coldly. He is taunting us. Does this change the plan? I asked, fear tightening my throat. Alexander looked at the burning building, then at me. No, he said. It accelerates it. Ivanov wants a show? Tomorrow night we give him the final performance. He turned to Sergei. Get the car, and get the Countess's diamonds. My wife needs to look like royalty. The siren continued to wail, a herald for the violence to come. This plan is absolutely insane. Swapping an insulin cartridge right under a Mafia boss's nose? Emma has gone from nursing student to undercover assassin real quick. Do you think she can pull it off? Or will Nikolai sniff out the fear? Let me know your predictions in the comments. Shout out to all our amazing viewers across the US. Where are you enjoying the story from? Is anyone watching from Georgia, Virginia, or maybe Washington, D.C.? See, sound off below. Remember to like and subscribe to give Emma some luck for the life or death performance coming up. The Catherine Palace was not designed for murder. It was designed for awe. As our limousine crunched over the snow-packed driveway, the palace loomed out of the darkness, a Baroque confection of blue, white, and gold. Floodlights bathed the facade in an artificial day, making the snowdrifts glitter like crushed diamonds. It was breathtaking. It was terrifying. "Remember," Alexander said, his voice low in the quiet cabin. "You are not Emma Volkov, the nursing student. You are Emma Volkov, the spoiled American trophy who is terrified of her husband's enemies." I adjusted the heavy diamond collar around my neck. It felt cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the sweat trickling down my spine. My dress was a masterpiece of ice blue silk, fitted tight to the waist and flaring out in a dramatic train. It screamed money, it screamed vanity. And concealed within the intricate folds of the left sleeve, held in place by a fragile stitch I could rip with a flick of my thumb, was the vial of potassium chloride. "I'm ready," I lied. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Я не жертва. I am not a victim." "Showtime," Alexander said. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, biting at my exposed shoulders. Alexander stepped out first. He didn't stride with his usual military precision. He hesitated. He hunched his shoulders slightly. He looked tired, defeated. It was the greatest acting performance I had ever seen, and it made my stomach churn to watch it. He offered me his hand. I took it, letting my own hand tremble, which wasn't difficult. We walked up the grand staircase, flanked by Ivanov's guards dressed in formal wear, their earpieces the only sign of their true function. "Invitation," the head of security grunted at the door. Alexander produced the gold-embossed card. The guard scanned it, then scanned us. He waved a metal detector wand over Alexander, patting him down roughly. Alexander allowed it, keeping his eyes on the floor. Then the guard turned to me. "Bag," he ordered. I handed over my small crystal clutch. He opened it, dumping the contents onto the table. A lipstick, a mirror, a tissue. Nothing else. "Arms up." I raised my arms. The wand beeped near my necklace. "Diamonds," Alexander muttered, his voice sounding thin. "She is wearing half the vault." The guard sneered, waving the wand over my silk-clad arms. He paused near my left wrist. My breath hitched. The vial was plastic, but the liquid inside. He frowned, tapping the wand against my wrist. "It's a bracelet," I said, my voice rising in panic. Real panic. "Please, don't scratch it. It's vintage Cartier." The guard rolled his eyes at the vapid American woman and waved us through. I exhaled, my knees weak. Step 1. Infiltration. Complete. The great hall was a sea of gold. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the hundreds of guests, the crystal chandeliers, and the towering ceilings painted with scenes of triumphs past. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting meat, and power. Heads turned as we entered. The whispers started immediately, a hive of bees disturbed. "Is that him, the wolf?" "He looks smaller than I remember." "He brought the wife. He must be desperate." Alexander held my arm, not protectively, but clingingly, as if he needed me for support. We moved through the crowd. I saw faces I recognized from the news, politicians, oligarchs, captains of industry, all here to kiss the ring of the new king. "There," Alexander whispered, his lips barely moving. At the far end of the hall, seated on a velvet chair that looked suspiciously like a throne, was Nikolai Ivanov. He wasn't the monster I had imagined. I expected a scarred brute. Instead, Nikolai was an obese, jovial-looking man in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and a tuxedo that strained against his bulk. He held a plate of pastries in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. He looked like a grandfather who spoiled his grandchildren. But then I saw his eyes. They were black, bead-like, and utterly dead. "He's eating," I whispered. "That's good. His blood sugar will spike. He'll check his pump soon." "Stay close," Alexander murmured. We approached the throne. The circle of sycophants parted, sensing the drama. The music seemed to fade. The room held its breath. Alexander stopped 10 feet from Nikolai. He bowed his head. "Nikolai," Alexander said. Nikolai Ivanov chewed a macaron slowly, swallowing before he spoke. His voice was wheezy, wet, Alexander, Nikolai smiled, revealing teeth stained with wine. Or should I say, the prodigal son. You look tired, little wolf. America has not been kind to your waistline, or your pride. I am tired, Nikolai, Alexander said, keeping his eyes averted. I am tired of looking over my shoulder. I am tired of the fires. And so you come to my house. Nikolai spread his arms. To what? Beg? To negotiate. Alexander said, I want out. I want safe passage for me and my family back to New York. In exchange, I give you the shipping routes, the docks, everything my father built. A gasp rippled through the crowd. This was total surrender. It was the abdication of a dynasty. Nikolai laughed. It was a wet, hacking sound. He wiped crumbs from his lips. You offer me what is already mine, Nikolai scoffed. I took your docks yesterday. I burned your warehouse today. You have nothing to trade, Alexander. He stood up, groaning slightly under his own weight. He waddled down the 2 steps from his dais, approaching Alexander. He was shorter than my husband, but in this moment, he loomed larger. Look at you, Nikolai sneered, poking a fat finger into Alexander's chest. My brother feared you. He said you were a demon, but you are just a dog with a collar. He turned his gaze to me. I shrank back, clutching Alexander's arm. Alex. I whimpered, pitching my voice to be heard. And this? Nikolai's eyes traveled over me, lascivious and gross. The prize. The American nurse. Vanya told me you have fire, little girl, but you look frozen now. He reached out, grabbing my chin with sticky fingers. His grip was painful. Please, I whispered, tears springing to my eyes. Just let us go. Let you go? Nikolai leaned in, his breath smelling of sugar and rot. I think I will keep you. As a souvenir. You can play the piano for me. I hear your daughter is quite talented, though she nearly lost a finger. At the mention of Lily, Alexander stiffened. This was the dangerous moment. If he broke character now, we were dead. Instead, Alexander dropped to his knees. The room erupted in shock. The great Alexander Volkov, kneeling before his enemy. Please, Nikolai. Alexander begged, grabbing Nikolai's hand and kissing the ring on his finger. Take everything. Take the money. Take the territory. Just leave my wife and child out of it. I beg you. It was pathetic. It was humiliating. And it was the distraction. Nikolai threw his head back and roared with laughter, intoxicated by the sight of his enemy broken at his feet. His belly shook. Look, Nikolai shouted to the crowd. Look at the wolf of Street Petersburg. While Nikolai's attention was on the crowd, and Alexander held his right hand, I moved. I stepped forward, as if to plead alongside my husband. I stumbled, my left hand brushing against Nikolai's waist, right where his tuxedo jacket fell open. My fingers found the cold plastic of the insulin pump clipped to his belt. Snap. I popped the reservoir latch. Slide. I pulled the insulin cartridge out. It fell into my sleeve. Slide. I dropped the vial of potassium chloride from my sleeve into the pump. Click. I snapped it shut. It took 3 seconds. Get off me. Nikolai shoved Alexander away, then backhanded me. The blow caught me on the cheekbone, sharp and stinging. I cried out, falling to the floor beside Alexander. Filth, Nikolai spat, adjusting his jacket. He didn't check his belt. Why would he? He had just slapped a woman and humiliated a rival. He was invincible. Alexander scrambled to me, helping me up. Emma, are you okay? I'm fine, I sobbed, burying my face in his chest. I just want to leave. Get out. Nikolai waved a dismissive hand. Go run back to your hotel. I will decide tomorrow if I let you live. But tonight I celebrate. He turned his back on us, walking back to his throne. Music, Nikolai shouted. More wine, and bring me the cake. Alexander pulled me toward the exit. We walked fast, head down, the picture of shame. Did you do it? Alexander breathed into my ear as we reached the doors. Yes, I whispered, my cheek throbbing. Good girl. We burst out into the cold night air. The limo was waiting. We dove inside. Go, Alexander ordered the driver. Airport, now. As the car sped away, I looked back at the palace. Inside the great hall, Nikolai Ivanov sat on his throne, A waiter brought him a slice of heavy chocolate cake. He took a bite. His blood sugar would rise. The pump's sensor would detect the spike. It would calculate the necessary dose of insulin. It would inject the solution. Potassium chloride. It stops the heart in diastole. It creates an arrhythmia so severe the heart simply gives up. How long? Alexander asked, pouring me a drink from the car's decanter. His demeanor had shifted instantly. The defeated man was gone. The wolf was back, looking at me with intense, burning pride. Depends on how much cake he eats, I said, holding an ice pack to my cheek. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Alexander checked his watch. Just enough time to reach the tarmac. He reached out, touching my bruising cheek. He hit you. I barely felt it, I said, and it was true. Compared to the rush of adrenaline, the slap was a mosquito bite. He is a dead man, Alexander said satisfyingly. He is already a corpse. He just doesn't know he has stopped breathing. The complication. The phone in the limo rang. It wasn't Alexander's secure line. It was the car phone, a hard line built into the vehicle. Alexander stared at it. Only a few people had this number. He picked it up. Volkov. There was a moment of silence. Then a voice I recognized, a voice that made the blood freeze in my veins. Hello, Papa Alex. It was Vanya. Alexander's face went white. Vanya, you are in a cell on my jet. Was, Vanya corrected. Her voice was strained, weak, but triumphant. Your American security is predictable. Dmitri is strong, but he is not immune to a hidden blade in a boot heel. My hand flew to my mouth. Dmitri. He is alive, Vanya said, bleeding out on the tarmac, but alive. I took the phone from the cockpit. What do you want? Alexander asked, his voice deadly calm, though his hand was crushing the receiver. I want to make a trade, Vanya said. You think you were clever at the ball? Nikolai is a glutton, but his head of security is not. He saw the wife's little magic trick on the surveillance camera. He just rewound the tape. My heart stopped. They haven't told Nikolai yet, Vanya continued. They are waiting for my signal. I can warn him to disconnect the pump, or I can let him die. Name your price, Alexander said. The jet takes off, Vanya said, with me on it, and with the girl. No, Alexander snarled. If you don't agree, Vanya said. I call the palace security. They lock down the gates. You never leave the grounds. Nikolai lives, and you die in the snow. And I kill the girl anyway before I fly away. Lily isn't on the jet, I whispered to Alexander. She's at the bunker. Alexander covered the mouthpiece. She thinks Lily is on the jet. She thinks we brought her to the airport to evacuate immediately. He looked at me. A terrible understanding passed between us. Vanya was bluffing about having Lily, but she wasn't bluffing about warning Nikolai. If she called the palace, the gates would close. We would be trapped, and Nikolai would survive. You have 5 seconds, Wolf, Vanya said. Alexander looked at the phone, then at his watch. Deal, Alexander said. We are 5 minutes out. Don't make the call. He hung up. Alex? I asked, panic rising. What are you doing? She'll figure out Lily isn't there. We aren't going to the airport, Alexander said to the driver. Pull over. What? Vanya is at the airfield. She has a hostage, Dmitri. She has the jet, and she holds Nikolai's life in her hand. He reached under the seat and pulled out a heavy case. He opened it, revealing a sniper rifle. I can't stop the pump from here, Alexander said. And I can't stop Vanya from making that call if we drive to the airport. She'll see us coming. So what do? We let Nikolai die, Alexander said grimly. We pull over. We wait for the cardiac arrest. Once Nikolai is dead, Vanya has no leverage. She can't warn a corpse. But Dmitri, if we wait, Vanya might kill Dmitri to prove a point, or she might take off. And if she takes off, she escapes, I said. After everything. No. Alexander stepped out of the car into the snowbank. He assembled the rifle with blinding speed. She is on the tarmac. The jet is stationary. He wasn't aiming at the airport. He was aiming at a transformer box on a telephone pole half a mile down the road. What are you doing? Cutting the lines, Alexander said. If I take out the grid, the cell towers in this sector go down. She can't call the palace. She can't call anyone. But that cuts our comms too. We don't need comms. Alexander looked at me, the snow falling on his lashes. We need time. Nikolai has ate the cake. The clock is ticking. I just need to silence the world for 10 minutes. He looked through the scope. Crack. Sparks showered in the distance. The lights of the distant town flickered and died. The world went black. Now, Alexander threw the rifle back in the car. Now we drive to the airport, and we finish this. The world was stripped of color, reduced to shades of black and charcoal by the blackout. Our limousine abandoned on the snowy access road, Alexander and I moved on foot toward the private airfield. The wind howled, masking the sound of our boots crunching through the knee-deep drifts. My ice blue gown was soaked, the hem frozen stiff, weighing me down like chainmail. But I didn't feel the cold. I felt only the adrenaline, sharp and metallic in my mouth. Ahead, the Gulf Stream sat on the tarmac like a sleeping beast. Its cabin lights were dead, cut along with the grid, but the emergency auxiliary lights cast a faint, eerie red glow through the portholes. The air stairs were lowered. "Stay behind me," Alexander whispered, his breath vanishing into the darkness. He held the sniper rifle, not designed for close quarters, but it was the only weapon we had left. "If you hear shooting, you run into the woods. You don't look back." "Dmitri is on that plane," I hissed back, clutching my medical bag, a kit Alexander kept in every vehicle. "If he's bleeding out, he doesn't have time for me to run." Alexander looked at me. The blackout hid his eyes, but I felt his intensity. "Then stay low. And don't hesitate." We reached the bottom of the stairs. The silence was absolute. No engine whine, no movement. Alexander signaled, "Up." He ascended the stairs, the rifle raised. I followed, stepping in his footprints. We reached the open hatch. The smell hit me first. Copper, fresh blood. Alexander swept into the cabin, moving left. I followed, scanning right. The luxury interior was a wreck. A bulkhead was dented. Glass littered the carpet. And there, slumped against the galley wall, was Dmitri. His face was gray, drained of blood. A tourniquet made from a torn strip of curtain was tied clumsily around his thigh, but blood was still soaking through his trousers. His eyes were half open, glassy. "Dmitri," I whispered, rushing to him. "Mrs. Volkov," he wheezed. "She, cockpit." "Clear the cabin," Alexander ordered, moving past us toward the cockpit door. I dropped to my knees beside Dmitri. I ripped open my medical bag. "Dmitri, look at me. Stay with me." "Behind you," he choked out. I spun around. Vanya wasn't in the cockpit. She had been waiting in the lavatory, right behind where Dmitri sat. The door burst open. Vanya lunged, not with a gun, but with a jagged shard of mirror glass wrapped in cloth. She moved with the desperate, feral speed of a trapped animal. "Alexander!" I screamed. Alexander spun around, but the rifle was too long, too unwieldy in the narrow aisle. He couldn't bring it to bear in time. Vanya wasn't aiming for him. She was aiming for me. She wanted to take the thing the wolf loved most. I threw myself backward, tripping over Dmitri's legs. The glass shard slashed the air where my throat had been a second before, catching the shoulder of my parka instead. Feathers exploded into the air. Vanya raised the shard for a second strike, her eyes wide and manic. "He dies with you." Bang. The shot was deafening in the confined space. It didn't come from Alexander. It came from the floor. Dmitri, half dead and bleeding out, had pulled his backup piece, a small caliber ankle gun. His hand was shaking violently, but at point-blank range, he didn't miss. The bullet took Vanya in the stomach. She gasped, stumbling back, clutching her midsection. The glass shard fell from her hand. She looked down at the spreading stain on her tactical vest, confused. Alexander didn't hesitate. He dropped the rifle and crossed the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed Vanya by the throat and slammed her against the bulkhead. "Is he dead?" Vanya spat blood at him, grinning through red teeth. Did the pump work, or did I fail him? Alexander stared into her eyes. He wanted to kill her. I could see every muscle in his body vibrating with the urge to snap her neck. But he didn't. "Check the time," Alexander said coldly. Vanya blinked, her eyes darting to the wall clock that ran on battery. It was 11:15 p.m. 15 minutes since the cake, Alexander said. "The blackout killed the signal towers, Vanya. You couldn't warn him, and the ambulance couldn't be called." Vanya's grin faltered. The fanaticism in her eyes cracked, replaced by a dawning horror. "He's gone," Alexander whispered, leaning close. "You failed. You are the last of a dead lineage." Vanya let out a wail, a sound of pure anguish. She tried to claw at him, but her strength was gone. She slid down the wall, leaving a streak of red. "Save him," she whispered, looking at nothing. "Save the king." Her eyes rolled back, her breathing stopped. The cabin fell silent, save for the wind whistling outside and Dimitri's ragged gasps. "Emma," Alexander said, his voice tight. "Dimitri." I scrambled back to the head of security. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold clarity of triage. I cut away his pant leg. The wound was deep, the femoral artery was nicked, but not severed. The makeshift tourniquet had saved his life, but barely. "I need light," I shouted. "Alex, hold the flashlight." Alexander retrieved a tactical light from his belt and shone it on the wound. I packed the injury with clotting gauze, applying pressure with all my weight. "Stay with me, Dimitri," I commanded. "You don't get to die. You have 3 daughters, remember? You promised to teach them how to drive." Dimitri managed a weak, blood-stained smile. "They drive. Worse than Greg." "Greg," I realized. "Where is Greg?" "Cockpit," Dimitri wheezed. "Hiding." Of course he was. "Hold this pressure," I told Alexander, grabbing his hand and placing it over the wound. "Don't let up, not even for a second." I grabbed a saline bag and an IV kit. My hands moved on autopilot, find the vein, insert the needle, start the flow. I was no longer the terrified wife or the imposter at the ball. I was a nurse. This was my domain. For 20 minutes, we worked in the red gloom of the cabin. I stabilized him. I stitched the worst of the tear. I monitored his pulse. Finally, Dimitri's color began to return. His breathing evened out. "He's stable," I announced, sitting back on my heels, wiping sweat and blood from my forehead. "But he needs a hospital. He needs a transfusion." "We can't go to a Russian hospital," Alexander said. "We fly. I have a medical team on standby in Helsinki. It's a 40-minute flight." He stood up and walked to the cockpit door. He kicked it open. Greg was curled up under the co-pilot seat, wearing a pilot's headset he must have scavenged. "Is it over?" Greg squeaked. "Get up," Alexander ordered. "Can you fly this thing?" I have a license for a Cessna. This is a Gulfstream." "It has wings and an engine," Alexander said, hauling Greg up. "And the actual pilot is likely tied up in the cargo hold or dead, so you are flying. I will co-pilot." "You know how to fly?" Greg asked, wide-eyed. "I know how to take off," Alexander said. "Landing is a problem for later." As the jet engines roared to life, shaking off the snow, the cabin lights flickered. The power grid in the town below was rebooting. I sat on the floor beside Dimitri, holding his hand. "Phone," Alexander called from the cockpit. "Check the news. We have signal." I pulled out the burner phone Alexander had given me. I turned it on. The screen glowed bright in the dim cabin. I navigated to the Russian news network. Breaking news. Tragedy at Catherine Palace. I clicked the link. The anchor was speaking in somber tones. The chyron at the bottom of the screen told the story. Nikolai Ivanov, prominent businessman and philanthropist, dead at 64. Cause of death: massive cardiac arrest. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for days. "Alex," I shouted toward the cockpit. "It's confirmed. Cardiac arrest." Through the open door, I saw Alexander's shoulders sag, just for a second. Then he straightened up, flipping switches on the overhead panel. "We are clear." His voice came over the intercom, strong and steady. "Wheels up in 30 seconds. Next stop, freedom." The jet lurched forward, gathering speed. I felt the G-force press me against the bulkhead. We lifted off into the storm, punching through the clouds. I looked out the window. Below us, Street Petersburg was a grid of golden lights, beautiful and cruel. Somewhere down there, a king was dead. Somewhere down there, Vanya's body lay cooling on the tarmac. I looked at my hands. They were stained with Dimitri's blood. But underneath the blood, the diamond ring on my finger sparkled. I wasn't the same woman who had landed in this city 2 days ago. I had poisoned a man. I had treated a gunshot wound in a war zone. I had stared down an assassin. Alexander said he wanted a partner. He wanted a queen. I closed my eyes as the jet leveled off, cruising toward the border. He had one. Wow, just wow. Emma has officially evolved into a queen. She saved Dmitri mid-flight and took down a trained assassin. Nikolai is gone, and they are finally free. On a scale of 1 to 10, how badass was Emma in this chapter? I'm giving her a solid 100. Tell me what you think in the comments. A huge thank you to everyone sticking with us, especially our viewers in the US. No matter which state you call home, drop a hi in the comments so we can connect. The journey isn't over yet. We still have the emotional aftermath and the ending we've all been waiting for. Like, share, and subscribe right now so you don't miss the finale. The flight to Helsinki was 40 minutes of pure, distilled terror. Greg, whose aviation experience was limited to single-engine props in clear Nevada skies, was wrestling with a multi-million-dollar jet in a Nordic blizzard. The Gulf Stream bucked and groaned, buffeted by crosswinds that threatened to shear the wings off. Bank left. Alexander's voice cracked over the intercom, calm but urgent. You are drifting into the red zone. Pull up, Greg, pull up. In the cabin, I was strapped into a jump seat next to Dmitri. The G-forces pressed me back, making it hard to breathe. Dmitri had lost consciousness 5 minutes ago, his face ashen, but his pulse was still there, thready and stubborn. Hang on, Dmitri, I whispered, clutching his cold hand. We're almost there. Don't you dare quit on me now. The body of Vanya lay at the back of the plane, covered by a tarp. A grim passenger for a grim journey. Runway in sight, Greg screamed from the cockpit, his voice shrill with panic. I can't see the lights. The snow is too thick. Instruments only, Alexander commanded. Trust the sensors. Do not look out the window. Hands on the throttle. Ease back. Now. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud that shook the floorboards. The ground rushed up to meet us, a blur of white and gray. We hit the tarmac hard. The jet bounced, slammed down again, and screeched. I was thrown forward against the harness, the breath knocked out of me. The tires howled as the brakes engaged, fighting for purchase on the icy runway. We skidded sideways, the tail swinging out. Reverse thrusters, Alexander roared. The engines roared in protest. The plane shuddered violently, then slowly, agonizingly, began to straighten out. We slowed. We rolled. And finally, with a heavy groan of metal settling, we stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was the whine of the spooling down engines and the frantic beating of my own heart. We're alive. Greg's voice came over the speaker, sounding like he was on the verge of tears. Holy times T, we're alive. I unbuckled my harness, my fingers numb. I checked Dmitri immediately. He was still breathing. The cabin door opened from the outside. Freezing air rushed in, followed by a team of paramedics in bright yellow parkas. They moved with military efficiency, Alexander's private team. Status? The lead medic shouted over the wind. Male, mid-30 seconds. Gunshot wound to the femoral artery. I recited the report automatically, slipping into nurse mode. Stabilized with a tourniquet and packing. Significant blood loss. He needs O-negative and surgery immediately. We got him, the medic said, signaling his team. They lifted Dmitri onto a stretcher and rushed him out into the waiting ambulance. Alexander emerged from the cockpit. He looked wrecked. His white shirt was stained with grease and blood, his hair wild. He helped a trembling Greg out of the pilot's seat. You did good, Alexander said to Greg. It was rough, but it was genuine. You got us down. I never want to fly again, Greg mumbled, his legs shaking so bad he could barely stand. I'm taking the train home. I don't care if there's an ocean. I'll build a bridge. Alexander steered him toward the exit where a second car was waiting. Go with the medics, get checked out, then get a drink. You earned it. As the cabin emptied, leaving only Alexander and me with the covered body in the back, the silence returned. Alexander looked at me. He looked at the blood on my hands, the ruined blue dress, the bruising on my cheek where Nikolai had slapped me. He didn't say a word. He walked over and pulled me into his arms. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was a collision. He held me so tight my ribs ached, burying his face in my neck, inhaling sharply. He was shaking a fine, high-frequency tremor that I only felt because I was pressed against him. I thought I lost you, he whispered into my hair. When Vanya came out of that bathroom, I was too slow. I was too far away. You weren't, I said, gripping his coat. We made it, Alex. We won. We survived, he corrected, pulling back to look at my face. He traced the bruise on my cheekbone with his thumb, his eyes dark with regret. There is a difference. The safe house in Helsinki was a modern glass and steel apartment overlooking the frozen harbor. It was stark, clean, and silent. We left the chaos at the airport. Vanya's body was handled by the cleaners. Greg was sedated in a guest room. Dmitri was in surgery at a private clinic nearby. It was just us. I stood in the massive bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her makeup was smeared, her hair a tangled mess, her expensive gown torn and stained with dried blood, some hers, some Dmitri's, some Vanya's. She looked terrifying. She looked powerful. The door opened. Alexander entered. He had stripped off his coat and shirt. His torso was a map of scars, old bullet wounds, knife slashes, memories of a violent life. But tonight, he looked vulnerable. "The water is warm," he said softly. He walked over to the shower, a massive rainfall setup big enough for two, and turned it on. Steam began to fill the room. He came up behind me, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He reached for the zipper of my dress. "May I?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked the night of our wedding, before our first kiss. A request for permission. A reminder that even here, even now, my body was my own. I nodded. He lowered the zipper. The ruined silk pooled at my feet. I stepped out of it, leaving the armor of the trophy wife on the floor. We stepped into the shower. The hot water hit us like a benediction. Alexander didn't try to seduce me. He picked up a sponge and the soap. He began to wash me. He started with my hands, scrubbing away the dried blood from under my fingernails. He moved to my arms, washing away the invisible residue of the poison vial I had carried. He washed my neck, careful of the small cut from Vanya's glass shard. "I'm sorry," he murmured as he worked, the soap suds swirling pink down the drain. "I dragged you into the mud. I promised you a palace, and I gave you a war. I chose the war," I said, turning to face him. I took the sponge from his hand. "Now let me wash you." I scrubbed his chest, his arms. I washed the gunpowder residue from his skin. I washed the sweat of fear from his back. "You didn't drag me, Alex," I said, looking up at him through the steam. I walked in. I stayed. And tonight I realized something. "What?" "I'm not just the collateral damage anymore," I said. "And I'm not just the prize. I'm the partner. You can't protect me from this world, Alex. It's too late. I'm part of it." Alexander looked at me, water dripping from his dark lashes. "That terrifies me." "Good." I reached up, cupping his face. "Fear keeps us alive, remember?" He let out a ragged breath and kissed me. It was slow, tender, and desperate. It was a kiss of reclamation. We weren't having sex to forget. We were connecting to remember that we were still human. That despite the death we had dealt, we were still capable of life. Later, wrapped in thick robes, we sat in the living room watching the news on a muted TV. The headline was everywhere. Russian tycoon Nikolai Ivanov dead at Winter Ball. "They're calling it a tragedy," Alexander said dryly, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "A loss for the business community. Do they suspect foul play?" "The toxicology report will come back inconclusive. Potassium chloride breaks down quickly, and since he was diabetic, insulin failure is a plausible cause. The police are already closing the file. My contacts in St. Petersburg say the other families are scrambling to carve up his territory. They aren't looking at us. They are too busy fighting each other." "So it's over?" I asked. "Really over?" "With Ivanov?" "Yes." Alexander handed me the wine. "The threat is neutralized. The bounty on our heads is gone because the man who signed the checks is dead." He sat down next to me, resting his head back against the sofa. "We can go home. To New York. To the estate. To the fortress," I corrected gently. "It doesn't have to be a fortress anymore," he said. "We can unlock the gates. We can send the extra guards home. We can breathe." The phone on the coffee table buzzed. It was the secure line. Alexander picked it up. "Volkov." He listened for a moment, and his face softened. The hard lines of the wolf smoothed out, leaving only the husband and father. "Put her on," he said tenderly. He handed the phone to me. "It's Nadia. Someone wants to say goodnight." I took the phone, my hand trembling slightly. "Hello?" Mommy? The sound of Lily's voice broke the dam I had been holding up since the airfield. A sob escaped my throat, hot and sharp. Hi, baby, I choked out. Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay? Lily asked. Nadia made me hot chocolate. But the bunker is boring. When are you coming back? Soon, I promised, wiping tears from my cheeks. Very soon. Papa and I are just finishing some work. Did you beat the bad guys? She asked innocently. I looked at Alexander. I looked at the dark Helsinki sky outside the window. I thought of Vanya. I thought of the man in the palace eating cake. Yes, Lily, I said, my voice steadying. We beat the bad guys. They won't bother us anymore. Good, Lily said decisively. Can we get a puppy when you come home? Papa promised. I laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. Yes, we can get a puppy. We can get two. I handed the phone back to Alexander. He spoke to her for another minute, promising gifts and swift returns, before hanging up. He looked at me. 2 puppies? You owe me, I said, curling my legs under me. I saved your life. I infiltrated a palace. I think I earned negotiating rights on the pet policy. Fair. Alexander smiled. He reached out and took my hand, intertwining our fingers. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the snow fall over the harbor. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. But for the first time in days, the knot of dread in my stomach was gone. Emma, Alexander said softly. Thank you. He didn't say what for. He didn't have to. He wasn't thanking me for the mission. He was thanking me for staying, for seeing the monster and not running away, for looking at the blood on his hands and choosing to hold them anyway. I love you, Alex, I said. It was the first time I had said it without fear, without reservation. He froze. He looked at me, his dark eyes shimmering with an emotion he rarely showed. And I, he whispered, lifting my hand to kiss the knuckles, am entirely, irrevocably yours, until the last star burns out. We had walked through the fire. We had scorched the earth to protect our own. And now, in the quiet aftermath, we could finally begin to build something that wouldn't burn. We could build a home. The Helsinki morning was crisp, the sky a piercing, innocent blue that seemed to mock the violence of the night before. We stood on the private tarmac again, but the atmosphere had shifted. The panic was gone, replaced by the somber efficiency of the cleanup. A medical jet was idling nearby, its ramp lowered to accept a stretcher. Dmitri lay on the gurney, pale and groggy, but awake. His leg was heavily bandaged, and an IV drip hung above him. You are being transferred to a specialist facility in Zurich, Alexander told him, resting a hand on his security chief's shoulder. Best vascular surgeons in Europe. They will put you back together. Zurich, Dmitri grunted, a faint smile touching his lips. Expensive chocolate. I approve. Take your time, Alexander said seriously. Your job will be waiting for you. And your salary has been doubled, retroactive to last year. Dmitri's eyes flickered to me. Mrs. Volkov. Nice stitching. For an amateur. I laughed, though tears pricked my eyes. Don't get used to it, Dmitri. Next time I'm charging consultant fees. Understood, ma'am. We watched as the medics loaded him onto the plane. He was more than an employee now. He was blood. He had taken a bullet for us, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that Alexander would burn down half of Switzerland if the doctors didn't save that leg. The medical jet taxied away, leaving us with the final piece of unfinished business. Greg. He stood by the black SUV, shivering in a borrowed coat that was too big for him. He looked small, defeated. He held a plastic bag containing his few possessions, a wallet, a passport, and a pack of gum. Alexander turned to me. The wind whipped his dark hair, but his expression was unreadable. He is your past, Emma, Alexander said quietly. You decide his future. He reached into his coat and pulled out a gun. It wasn't the heavy combat pistol he usually carried. It was a smaller, clean piece. He didn't hand it to me. He just held it at his side, the offer implicit. He sold you, Alexander reminded me. He put a target on Lily's back. In my world, the penalty for that is death. No trial, no appeal. I looked at the gun, then at Greg. Greg didn't beg. He didn't run. He just looked at me with hollow, exhausted eyes. He knew he deserved it. Maybe in some twisted way he even wanted it. It would be an end to the fear that had ruled his life since he gambled away his first dollar. I walked over to him. The snow crunched under my boots. "Emma," Greg whispered. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't matter, but I am." "You're right," I said coldly. "It doesn't matter. Your sorry doesn't fix the window in the music room. It doesn't take the fear out of my daughter's eyes." I looked at Alexander. "Give me the wallet." Alexander frowned, confused, but he signaled to one of his men, who had confiscated Greg's wallet earlier. He handed it to me. I opened it. I took out the cash, a few $100s. I took out his credit cards. I took out his ID. I dropped the cards and the ID onto the tarmac. Then, I ground my heel into them, snapping the plastic. "Emma?" Greg asked, his voice trembling. "You died last night, Greg." I said, "Gregson Lawson, the man who left me at the altar, the man who sold me out. He died in a plane crash outside St. Petersburg. That's the story." I shoved the cash back into his hand. "You are going to get on a train," I told him, my voice steady and hard. "You are going to go south. Maybe Spain. Maybe Morocco. I don't care. You will never use your real name again. You will never contact your parents. You will never, ever come back to New York." Greg stared at me, tears welling in his eyes. "You're letting me go?" "I'm not letting you go," I corrected him. "I'm exiling you. Being dead is easy, Greg. Living as a ghost? That's punishment." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "And if I ever see you again, if I ever even hear a whisper that you are near my family, I won't send Alexander. I won't send the police." I looked him dead in the eye. "I'll come myself, and I won't miss next time." Greg swallowed hard. He nodded, a jerky, broken motion. "Thank you. Thank you, Em." "Don't call me Em," I said, turning my back on him. "Mrs. Volkov." I walked back to Alexander. He was watching me with a look of intense fascination, bordering on reverence. "Mercy," Alexander mused as he holstered his gun. "A dangerous habit." "It wasn't mercy," I said, watching Greg walk toward the terminal. A lonely figure against the white snow. "He has to live with himself every day. That's worse than a bullet." Alexander wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me into his warmth. "Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Volkov. Your punishments are poetic." "Let's go home, Alex," I said, leaning against him. "I'm done with the snow." The flight back to New York was quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence of the journey out. It was the peaceful silence of survivors. We slept. For hours, tangled together on the fold-out bed in the cabin, we slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. When I woke, we were beginning our descent. The skyline of Manhattan was visible through the window, a cluster of diamonds rising from the sea. It looked different to me now. Before, New York had been my struggle, the place of unpaid bills, late shifts, and loneliness. Now, it was my kingdom. I saw the city not as a crushing weight, but as a grid of lights that Alexander controlled, and by extension, that I protected. The car that met us at JFK was the familiar long limousine. But this time, the driver was new, a young man named Pavel, who looked terrified to be driving the boss. "Welcome home, Mr. Volkov." "Mrs. Volkov," Pavel stammered. "Drive, Pavel," Alexander said gently, "and relax. We are not in a hurry." We drove through the city, heading out to the suburbs. As we approached the estate, my heart began to race. Not from fear, but from anticipation. The iron gates, now repaired and reinforced, swung open smoothly. The drive was lined with trees stripped bare by winter, but I could already imagine them blooming in spring. The car stopped. Before Pavel could open the door, Alexander was out, helping me down. The front door of the mansion flew open. "Mommy, Papa." Lily came barreling out, wearing a coat over her pajamas and boots on the wrong feet. She launched herself off the top step. Alexander caught her midair. The sound of her laughter was the final seal on the contract. The debt was paid. "Did you bring me a present?" Lily asked, squishing Alexander's cheeks with her mittened hands. "Nadia said you went to the North Pole." "Better," Alexander grinned, looking at me over her head. "We brought you a promise." "What promise?" "That we aren't going anywhere ever again." That night, after the reunion, after the tears, after Mrs. Reynolds, who had recovered and returned from the clinic, made us a feast of comfort food, The house settled into a hush. I sat in the library, holding a cup of tea. Alexander was at his desk, going through a stack of paperwork that had accumulated in his absence. He picked up a document, read it, and frowned. "What is it?" I asked. "The trust fund for Lily," he said, "and the adoption papers." My breath hitched. "What about them?" "I signed them before we left," he said, looking up. "Whatever happened to me, I wanted to make sure you two were secure. Legally, she is mine now, if you agree." I put down my tea. I walked over to the desk. I looked at the paper. Certificate of adoption. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about protection. It was about a man who had looked at a fatherless child and decided to be her shield, long before he fell in love with her mother. "She's been yours for a long time, Alex," I said softly. I picked up a pen. I signed my name next to his. Emma Volkov. Alexander stood up. He walked around the desk and lifted me onto the edge of it, standing between my knees. "There is one more thing," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "You have a ring," I said, confused, glancing at the diamond on my hand. "That was a ring for a deal," Alexander said. "A ring for a contract, a ring for protection." He opened the box. Inside was a simple band. Not diamonds, not platinum. It was gold, etched with a pattern of vines. "This," he said, "is a ring for a choice. I asked you once to marry me to save your life. Now I am asking you to stay married to me to save mine." He looked at me with raw vulnerability. "Will you marry me, Emma? Not the Dawn, not the wolf. Just Alex, the man who is terrified of how much he needs you." Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and fast. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Alex. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, next to the diamond. It fit perfectly. "Then the debt is paid," he said, kissing me. "And the books are closed." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the scars on the driveway, covering the memories of the violence. Inside, the fire crackled, warm and bright. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were a family, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was exactly where I belonged. In the lion's den, on the throne. The first time I wore a wedding dress, it was borrowed. It was tight across the chest, loose in the waist, and smelled of someone else's perfume. I wore it in a stuffy cathedral filled with whispers, waiting for a man who would never show up. The second time I wore a wedding dress, it was mine. It was a custom creation of ivory lace and silk chiffon, designed not to constrain, but to flow. It fit my body as if it had been spun directly onto my skin. And as I stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom of the Volkov estate, I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a desperate single mother. I saw Emma Volkov. "You look." Nadia paused, her hands resting on my shoulders as she adjusted the veil. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Like sunrise after a long winter." "Don't make me cry, Nadia," I laughed, fanning my face. "I spent 2 hours on this makeup. I'm not ruining it." "The guests are seated, Mrs. Volkov," Nadia smiled, "and the groom is pacing. Not because he is afraid you won't come, but because he cannot wait to see you." I turned to look out the window. The estate grounds were transformed. The snow of Russia and the shadows of the past seemed a lifetime away. It was late spring. The gardens were a riot of blooming peonies and hydrangeas. The iron gates stood open, welcoming friends, not guarding against enemies. "Is Lily ready?" "She is with Dmitri," Nadia said, "managing the special guests." I smiled. Alexander kept his promises. "Then let's go," I said. "I don't want to keep my husband waiting." We didn't go back to a church. We held the ceremony in the rose garden, under a canopy of white wisteria. There were no whispers this time. There were no pitying looks. The crowd was small, maybe 50 people, the family in the truest sense. As I stepped onto the white runner, the string quartet began to play. Not the heavy, accusatory bells of street Augustines, but a light, soaring melody, Debussy. I walked alone. I didn't need anyone to give me away. I belonged to myself, and I was giving myself freely. At the end of the aisle stood Alexander. He wasn't wearing black. He wore a charcoal gray suit that brought out the silver in his eyes. He stood tall, his hands clasped in front of him, radiating a calm, magnetic power. When he saw me, his breath hitched. I saw his Adam's apple Bob, the formidable wolf of street. Petersburg, the man who had stared down assassins and dismantled empires, looked utterly undone by a woman in lace. But he wasn't alone at the altar. Standing beside him as his best man was Dmitri. He leaned slightly on a cane, a permanent souvenir from the airfield, but he looked sharp, healthy, and proud. And standing between them was our daughter. Lily, now 7, wore a dress of lavender tulle. Purple, always purple. She was beaming, her missing front tooth only adding to her charm. And in her arms, squirming and yipping, were 2 golden retriever puppies with red bows around their necks. "Hold them tight, Malishka," Alexander whispered to her as I approached, his eyes never leaving mine. I reached the altar. Alexander stepped forward, taking my hand. His touch was warm, solid, and familiar. "You came," he teased softly, a callback to the nightmare that had started it all. "Traffic was good," I replied, echoing my old excuse, but this time with a smile. The officiant, a close friend of Alexander's from the university, cleared his throat. "We are gathered here not to join 2 strangers," he began, "but to celebrate a union that has already been forged in fire. Emma and Alexander have already made their vows. They made them in silence, in sacrifice, and in courage. Today, they speak them aloud." Alexander turned to me. He didn't need a cue card. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying through the silent garden. "When I first found you, I thought I was acquiring a wife. I thought I was buying stability. I was arrogant." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. "I didn't know that I was meeting my equal," he continued, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "You taught me that power isn't about control, it's about protection. You taught me that a home isn't walls and gates, it's the people you let inside. You are my conscience, my courage, and my heart. I promise to stand between you and the world, not to hide you, but to fight beside you. I choose you, Emma, today, tomorrow, and forever." Tears pricked my eyes, but I let them fall. I took a deep breath. "Alex," I began. "When I met you, I was broken. I was waiting for someone to save me. But you didn't save me. You gave me the weapons to save myself. You loved me when I was weak, and you respected me when I became strong. You are the most dangerous man I know." I paused, smiling at him. "And the gentlest father. I promise to be your partner in the dark and in the light. I promise to never let you walk alone again. I choose you, Alexander, freely and completely." "Do you have the rings?" the officiant asked. Lily stepped forward, struggling with the puppies. "I have them, but Buster is trying to eat them." The crowd laughed as Alexander gently retrieved the rings from a velvet pouch tied to the puppy's collar. He slid a new band onto my finger, an eternity band of diamonds to sit between the engagement ring and the simple gold band from the library. Past, present, and future. "I now pronounce you, still husband and wife." The officiant smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Alexander didn't hesitate. He pulled me close, dipping me slightly, and kissed me with a passion that made the rest of the world disappear. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a seal, a claim, a promise kept. The reception was a blur of joy. We danced, not the stiff, fearful waltz of our first wedding, but a loose, happy sway under the fairy lights. Lily danced on Alexander's feet, giggling as he spun her around. I sat at our table, watching them. My heart felt so full I thought it might burst. Dmitri limped over, holding a glass of champagne. "A successful operation, Mrs. Volkov," he noted, clinking his glass against my water glass. "No casualties," I agreed, "except maybe the wedding cake. The puppies got to the bottom tier." "Collateral damage," Dmitri shrugged. He looked at Alexander, who was now holding court with a group of associates. Laughing at something one of them said, "I have never seen him like this. In 20 years, he is light." "He put down the weight," I said. We both did. "Ivanov's territories have been fully absorbed," Dmitri said quietly, shifting to business for a second. "The threats are gone. You should know. The nursing scholarship you established at the university? The first recipient sent a letter." I smiled. After we returned, I had used part of my allowance to start a foundation for single mothers returning to school. "That's good, Dmitri. That's really good." Alexander walked over, flushed and happy. He loosened his tie. "My feet hurt." Lily is a demanding dance partner. She takes after her father, I said. He sat down, pulling his chair close to mine. He placed a hand on my knee. Are you happy, Emma? It was the same question he had asked me in the garden 6 months after we met. But the answer was different now. I'm not just happy, Alex, I said. I'm whole. He leaned in, kissing my temple. Good, because I have one more surprise for you. No more surprises, I groaned. No more puppies, no more planes. A honeymoon, he whispered. A real one. No business, no bodyguards, well, maybe Dimitri at a distance. Just us. Fiji. 2 weeks. Fiji sounds nice, I mused, but we might have to delay it. Alexander pulled back, looking concerned. Why? Is it school? The foundation? I took his hand and placed it on my stomach. The fabric of the wedding dress was thick, but the heat of his palm seeped through. Because, I whispered, watching his eyes, I don't think I can fly in a few months, and I think Lily might be too busy being a big sister to watch the puppies. Alexander went still. The sounds of the party, the music, the laughter, the barking dogs, faded into the background. He looked at my stomach, then up at my eyes. His expression crumbled, the fierce wolf replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. Emma? His voice cracked. Are you? I nodded. 8 weeks. Alexander didn't say a word. He slid out of his chair and onto his knees, right there on the grass, in front of everyone. He pressed his face against my stomach, wrapping his arms around my waist. I stroked his hair as his shoulders shook. Thank you. He muffled the words against me. Thank you. Lily ran over, seeing her father on the ground. Papa, are you okay? Did you fall? Alexander looked up. There were tears in his eyes, bright and unashamed. He pulled Lily into the hug, sandwiching her between us. No, Malishka, he laughed, a sound of pure joy. I didn't fall. I flew. He stood up, pulling us both into his embrace. The 3 of us, the family built from wreckage, welded together by choice, and tested by fire. I looked out over the garden. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the estate. The bells of the old life had stopped ringing a long time ago. The silence was gone, replaced by the chaotic, messy, beautiful music of a life lived without fear. I was Emma Volkov. I was a survivor. I was a mother. I was a queen. And as Alexander kissed me under the fading light, I knew that this was the only ending that mattered. The one we wrote ourselves. And as the dust finally settled, Emma realized this wasn't just survival anymore, this was rebirth. The fear, the shadows, the lies, all of it had led her to this moment where strength replaced trembling, and love was no longer something stolen from her, but something she chose. Standing beside Alexander, with Lily safe in her arms, she understood one truth. Destiny had tried to break her, but she rose anyway. Yet in the world of fate's gentle hands, fate never sleeps for long. There are still secrets buried, debts unpaid, and paths that may twist again when least expected. But for now, their fragile peace glows like the final spark in a long night, beautiful, hard-earned, and trembling with promise. If this ending stirred something in you, tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for new powerful stories every day. Your next favorite episode is already on its way.